Yeah, based on how long those functions typically take, and again, I'm running against Sonnet 3.5, and I don't know how faster that might be for the situation, I would expect multiple users to be able to use it kind of concurrently, right? It's typically, the longer queries that I've run for it have been 15 seconds or so.
But often the sorts of queries you're talking about where it goes out to your code base and those things, that like they're pretty heavy, like there's quite a lot of requests going online.
Yeah, so I'm just assuming that it's fully, exhausting that server for those 15 seconds for the purpose of that calculation, right? But at the same time, I'm typically not working exactly at the same hours as the rest of my coworkers. We happen to be fully remote, so most of my activity happens while most of my team's asleep, and their activity kind of staggers throughout the day as it is.
So it might be okay, right?
Mm-hmm. And you can also, you're getting into a lot more interesting stuff with infrastructure and spinning stuff up and down in order to conserve GPUs, right? I assume no one's working on the weekends in general, unless you have some emergency going on. So like you could probably find some way to detect that idleness and shut it down when you're not going. I don't know how long the startup time actually is for the first guy in the office.
And I suspect if you rent at those prices, they're expecting you to book out a block of time.
For the cheaper, or yeah, if you're trying to get those actually like nicely scaled prices and the like, yeah, it's usually got to dedicate it. Some infrastructure, I believe you can set it up as I'm dedicating this many hours a month, not necessarily this many or this date to this date. So I think RunPod has that model, but it's been a little while since I've looked into that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a super complicated, confusing space. And my numbers might be way off. I don't really know, but that was just what I did.
Yeah. The other thing that's really interesting is, at least at my company, we've found that it helps a lot more for that kind of mid-range developer than it does for the seniors or for the juniors. Like the juniors just end up being confused because they can't read code as fast as they can write it. And your mid-range engineers, they're the ones that like would have to go look up a bunch of stuff on almost every task, and but they would be able to do it by themselves, and they'd be able to verify something someone else has done pretty quickly. So they end up getting much faster in our case. But a lot of the seniors have already fallen into, these are the tools I really like, and this is the way I like to do autocomplete, and I've gotten all of this muscle memory built up for, I'm typing these 4 characters, pressing tab, and I'm getting what I want. And those guys don't benefit as much until they kind of do the relearning. Similar to when I first learned Clojure, the hardest part was unlearning a bunch of OO habits. And I had to do that first before I could actually be more effective.
Do you think you're more effective now than you were before?
I think I was more effective within a month, but I still had to unlearn a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Can you, fake number?
Oh, for the AI stuff in particular. Because of the autocomplete function alone, which is the one that you'll have trouble with for the cybersecurity side of it, like I'm saving, I'd say easily an hour a day if I'm like actually coding. I don't get to code as much as I'd like. Because I'm standing up. And all of that stuff. And it's just, as I'm the most senior engineer at my company right now, so I'm often getting involved in all the product discussions and all that madness.
So you talked about using AI tools for basically kind of like really fancy auto-completion. I think you also said maybe asking some questions about how things are done in the code base. Are there other things either you or others have used AI for? I experimented with CodeRabbit the other day for doing peer reviews. Does anybody use it for like helping to design architecture or like other use cases?
Oh yeah, for the less integrated tools, like I'll often have my architecture that I've put together, and I'll, spit out my basic bullet points of an outline, expand that, send that to everyone after I verified it's pretty close to what I wanted anyway. But I'll also ask, do you see any holes in this? And usually it'll see the same holes I saw, but sometimes it'll catch something new. And more than that, it gives me that second voice to bounce something off of if I'm working at different hours for my coworkers.
I'm using it to, I have a project of killing Node.js and now we're moving it all to Clojure. So I'm experimenting with different tools to help me rewrite all of that stuff. Because you have very, very old code base will corrupt the actual like business logic to maybe percent of what you're looking at. It's like distilling that and getting closure out of it.
Yeah,
I haven't found like a good tool that just like, there's no magic bullet, right? Like it doesn't rewrite enclosure nicely, but at least it gets me close to understanding some gotchas and stuff.
yeah, and I've also had cases where I'll go to Claude or just any of those chat clients and ask, okay, I want to do something like dynamic binding in Clojure, like with redefs or anything of that nature with bindings. And I just want to do it, but I'm in Python and because I have to be for whatever reason. And it'll give me all the relevant suggestions of how it's typically done there, and that's nice. It's also really good for translating between different data formats, as long as you're using a powerful enough model that it doesn't make up stuff on that front. One of the important things when using anything like ChatGPT or Claude is setting up your user system prompt and including a phrase along lines of, if you don't know the answer, just tell me. Don't make it up.
Does that work?
Typically for me it's been.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I do have like almost 2 paragraphs of my user prompt on ChatGPT, and most of it's like, our relationship is purely transactional, don't give me all the pleasantries. You know, if you don't know something, ask a question.
I never got into like follow that. No, I didn't I'm curious about your approach.
It might also be that typically, instead of asking for the thing directly, if it's a more complicated or a more human kind of situation where I'm like bouncing a design or something like that, then I'll also include, instead of saying, give me this architecture diagram, I ask, do you need to know anything else to do this? And then usually it'll come back with a question or two instead.
It's a random thing, but adding the word please, really, like, it's weird as hell, but like,
Yep.
being polite gives you different results sometimes. Still
And
blows my mind.
one of the silly tricks that also helps, yeah.
I missed it.
Oh, one of the being polite tends to improve the output. Another thing that's important, and I'll get to that question that was over there. The easiest trick for making your output better on any particular query is the phrase, reflect on this and do it better. For whatever reason, that just works.
Maybe this is putting you on the spot, but can you like demo your process?
Yeah, I didn't actually prepare a demo sort of deal because I didn't know I was leading this session until I had already decided not to bring my keyboard. So we can see. Looks like I have HDMI, and I saw there was an HDMI dongle over here. So, oh, one other thing that's really important, especially when giving presentations with these tools running, just kill cursor and bring it back, because if you happened to edit a file with API keys in it, it may try to autocomplete those API keys into random places. Yep. All of that fun stuff. Luckily, all of my local API keys are individualized to me, and anything that actually matters for production is elsewhere.
We get your profile set up too. So while you're getting set up, does anyone have a clear idea on what the legal status of code generated by these things is? Because like, we don't know how these things are trained, and like, if we like, I don't know if anyone saw Winamp released all its source code, and they had this big disclaimer like, you can't change it, but it's open source. And people looked in it, they found GPL code, and
Well, and my more cynical view on it would be that the business people want to automate programmers badly enough that they're going to keep pouring money into that fire for a while. That, you know. Anyway. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, man. It's been a while. I wasn't planning on doing any actual code ones, so I don't even remember how to zoom in on here. Yep. Oh, and Shift P. Shift P. Text.
For reference, I can read where it says new at the bottom.
There we go. Found it. All right. So these are my slides for the lightning talk later, because that was a code base I know is like safe. I used reveal CLJS, which, you know, obviously it's not already trained on Clojure. It does kind of know reveal, and it's able to kind of pick up on the fact that this is similar to reveal in a lot of ways. Like, I even found it putting in some of the fragment classes that I didn't want, but, you know, that's how it is. So I may highlight a section or whatever else, such as this, and then just put in the directions, move this earlier in the presentation. So if it was really naive, what it's going to do is just move the code, the def, a little further up instead of finding the line where it's all put together. And it says I need to update some other function that's in the code. So I'll just tell it, oh yeah, I forgot I'm using the Command K version here. Whoops. I'm usually in Colmax, and this is in QWERTY right now. Well, I know that the actual part for this is a little further up, where there's just a vector of the slides in a particular order. I thought it might pick up on it in this case, but since it didn't work in that local selection, I then move over to press Command L, which starts this little chat panel over here. You can add extra files if you know what other files are needed, and so on. You can also do a full code base send, but we don't need that. And it'll, you know, give you some pleasantries and whatnot, and it will have this kind of generated thing where you might see this if you're going through a normal chat interface like ChatGPT, copying files in and out, and it has like there was existing code, and then I did some stuff. It likes to leave comments about what it did, and then tell you, like, you know, why it works the way it works, which works great for some people. Anyway, I hit that apply button, and now I have this diff of what it did. Remove this line, add this, or what it wants to do. Remove that line, add that line. I can actually, if I want to, save this buffer, and if I was actually running the REPL and everything, it would do all the auto reloading like it would normally for something in Figwheel, which this runs on, the reveal CLJS. And I would be able to see it before I accept the change. But, you know, if I just want to accept the change, I can do so. Another way that I'll often use it, and I just don't have example JSON randomly laying around right now, is I'll say reformat this into Eden, and then just paste the JSON in there or whatever else. Just simple reformats it does really well at. One of the things we asked about earlier was, what are some other novel ways you're using it? There is actually part of our production system that just kind of gets what it gets and is configured to output a certain JSON format, and it just says, reformat this into this kind of format, and it actually works enough that it only needs one retry at max. Works like 95% of the time and gets the format we want and doesn't hallucinate a bunch of new data unless it's a very simple format with like 2 fields, so there's usually all the data's there.
Do you ever give it like really complicated tasks, like think, you know, card level, top level, add a feature that allows the user to check a box.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah.
So one that I did some time ago that I don't even remember what file it was in, but it was a Clojure file that had reedit routes and a couple of handlers and a require for a namespace. And I wanted to add a flag that took out most of the irrelevant data or whatever else that might show up. And so then that's what I pasted in, was literally the task that I had written for another dev to pick up that might have been less familiar with the process. And I pasted in add a flag to this API that does XYZ, and read the diff, looks good, tested it, and it was fine. Because it was in one file. It does really poorly when there's multiple files involved.
Even if you send the whole code base?
Even if I send the whole code base, like it usually gets confused, or it will decide to do it one way in one file and not actually connect on the other file. Like it'll just have a different CSS class, for example, if I'm doing something HTML and CSS sometimes. It's not every time, but
I've seen a lot of people switching to using Tailwind, for example, because it's all in line in the same file, and it doesn't correlate one file to another. It doesn't have to keep invariance in mind across things. So just use Tailwind and it's all in one place, right?
Mhm.
The same thing, just do it.
yeah. And the way that I started this file, I even just copied my outline of a few bullet points and said, turn this into a reveal CLJS file or whatever else.
Yeah, so I just have a small thing that I found, or which is a bigger thing. It's Copilot. When you use chat in Copilot, those code fences that it gives you when you give it, they are actually real VS Code editors. So the record works in there and everything works in there.
Yeah, I saw your post on that. It's super interesting.
Yeah, so I do a lot of like interactive programming in there without touching my code.
Yeah.
Just like, and I have instructed it to include the NS file I'm working with, so then I can actually update my application
Yeah.
just from the chat.
I haven't tried that. I don't usually use the chat one. I typically am doing a pretty localized change or a single file change. Yeah.
I'm more using the chat much more.
Yeah. When I'm using the chat, it's usually investigation.
It just makes those, because they can do it because they own, I can do it as an extension developer.
Yeah, and that's why Cursor is a full fork.
You can't create an editor and embed it in another technology.
Yeah, I haven't, as a Canada, I haven't done anything to make this work. It's
Right.
just like, it just works in that chat, and that's amazing. And already everything where this works, like,
Yeah, at the editor extension level, that's why why Cursor isn't an extension, is because they couldn't do enough of stuff like that. So.
So when you're working, you said you don't use the chat that much. Do you mostly use the inline, just change this thing? Is that right?
I mostly use just the plain autocomplete. Like because it's so good at, I named my function and it completes the 4 lines it's going to be. Like that's where most of the time savings is for me. If I'm in an unfamiliar code base or an unfamiliar part of the code base, then I get some more time savings out of the chat and such. I'm just, usually in the familiar parts of the code base.
Yeah, it's interesting because I hate the autocomplete. I would turn it off because and I don't use Cursor, I must admit. But it seems to me to be wrong at least as often as it's right, and when it's wrong, it's really annoying. Whereas and when it's right, it's occasionally magical, right?
Mhm.
Occasionally it's like, oh my god, I cannot believe that just worked.
Yeah.
But it's sufficient. There's enough friction on the times it doesn't work that I just turn it off. Well, so I developed Cursor, so I'm always working in IntelliJ, and I'm actually speaking on Friday about some tooling that I've developed in this kind of area. But I've tried the JetBrains. In IntelliJ, there really aren't good options. The JetBrains one is surprisingly bad, yeah, that's a little bit that's what I'm talking about. And it has no support at all for Clojure, right? So I've been fiddling around. I have some stuff I've developed myself. I've tried a few other things, but a lot of these things offer autocomplete is like the first thing that any product like this offers, and it's always the first thing that I turn on.
Yeah. If you're like really familiar with the autocomplete in the process you're using, like that's what I was talking about earlier with the senior devs that like really know their autocomplete tools really well, and they just want to press their 3 characters and tab or whatever it is. Like that's why I have to unlearn doing that and just waiting for, okay, let me check that autocomplete. Cursor also has the nice, I don't know if Copilot copied it yet, but it has the nice ability to just take one S expression of autocompletion. Like you can just say, give me the next token of autocompletion when I see the whole autocomplete. And sometimes that will inform it that you didn't want the rest of it too. And it will occasionally regenerate with different stuff. And the multi-insertion autocomplete is also like part of what makes the cursor version of it magical for me.
Yeah, that's what people seem to really like that cursor tab, right? Where we can just sort of tab, and it will change.
Yeah, it'll even often just, yeah, the navigation tabbing complete, I'm still getting used to it, but I'm starting to like it where, for example, if I'm calling a function in a namespace that I haven't required yet, and I'm using either a new alias or it's just one that cursor hasn't seen in this session, then it will almost always say, the next thing you want to do is go up to the require line, so let me just tab navigate you up there. And that, you know, it's not a huge time savings, and it would be less of a time savings if I had my Emacs hotkeys set up in VS Code or in Cursor. But
Can I ask, like, how complicated the autocompletes are that you're doing? Because I would imagine most of it doesn't that. Some of my stuff is like, you know, take a data structure and format it in HTML. That's very straightforward. Some things are like take an order across many bins and like allocate it properly across several languages.
yeah, the vast majority of them are just simple ones. I mean, that's where most of the time savings is for me, is just the super common operations that are very localized. If I know what I'm doing, and it will also handle really well, like if I'm coding kind of normally with the autocomplete and whatnot, and I know which files I'm going to, when I get to that file, it often knows where I want to be in that file next, and it often knows like loosely whether I'm like just adding a field here or adding this thing to the call site or whatever else. Like it seems to do that pretty well. And, oh, go on.
Yeah, I'm using it for localization. I'm working with an app that works both in Norwegian and in Swedish. And I don't speak Norwegian well enough. I mean in Norwegian and in English, and I don't speak Swedish well enough. So if I just add stuff to the English part of the map, and then I can just hit enter in the Norwegian part, and it will. Yeah, I think to my knowledge, it's much better than what I would have.
Yeah. When I was using Copilot, one of the things I had to do right away was instead of disabling the autocomplete, I moved it to a different hotkey.
Yeah, I've done that as well.
I have a question. Has anyone here, just by a show of hands, is just avoiding integrating AI into your tool chain like the plague? What I'm specifically asking for is maybe you're at the point where you're like, you know, the amount of either whether it be hallucination or whether it be bugs in code that you have to track down with generated code is just not worth the hassle.
I have a different complaint. Most of what I do in my spare time is hang out on like beginner forums, helping people with like, you know, languages are fine, so help
Yeah, we haven't been doing hiring since it got super popular. But like our favorite hiring questions aren't like very coding anyway. Like they're usually like my favorite hiring question by a wide margin is teach us something, anything. You choose. We'll pretend we don't know it if we happen to know it. Like I just love that question because it lets you know how well that person communicates, how well that person handles when they're getting questioned about something they're presumably passionate about, and all sorts of other fun stuff like that. And it often lets you get a little bit of a glimpse into how teachable they are. And if someone's teachable and can teach, then you can solve the rest of that in training.
Not as relevant to your question, but I find like just interacting with a ChatGPT prompt is really helpful in coming up with good names for things, like what are functions. Like it's better than thesaurus. You can say like, hey, I have this data structure. Do I call it a diff or a delta, or is there like another word that like would be good for it?
It's so funny you mentioned that
Yeah.
because we have at Centripetal Networks where I work,
Yeah.
we have something that's responsible for the app that I work on. Which provisions a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes for our services, so then customers can trial it or do stuff with it. And I actually asked ChatGPT for more interesting names.
Yeah.
And I got coworkers here. I haven't told you guys I tried this. I tried this. I haven't told you guys I tried this. I asked ChatGPT I told it what Service Manager did, and I asked it for names, and it gave me some interesting, thought-provoking ones, and then some of the worst ones that I've ever have seen in my life.
Hey man, this is an open room.
But it also, it works really well for naming things, especially if you're willing to take that next step after it's given you some names and say, I like this one because of this, I don't like this one because of this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I already had something in my code base named this, and I wanted to distinguish it from that. And then I've had no luck with like writing actual code. And then sometimes like if you're using an API that has a lot of like public documentation, a lot of like public forum discussion about it, you can sort of like ask questions like, does this API provide any way of doing like this or that? And
Yeah.
a little bit faster than reading the documentation. But that's my experience with it.
Has anybody used any of these for creating Word documentations? Because that's the one thing I hate doing. So I haven't used any of these, but that's the one thing that
I will say that our customer service people have started using it in their emails and like marketing materials, and I can always tell. And I can always tell when someone uses it for me, so I would avoid
What
doing
about
that.
just in code comments or like
Yeah. If
describe
it's
what
in
this
code
function
comments,
does or
I mean like the real risk is I'm gonna read it, I don't know the person, and I instantly have like a negative impression. Right? So if I'm working with someone and I know them and I know they wrote the comment, I'll be like, okay, they must have seen that and they're like, that's accurate, and you know, that'll be fine. But yeah, it's like my default view on it is pretty negative, right? Which
but
is
okay, I never write any comments, so would you rather no comments
I
or
would
like
I would
chat?
rather no comments if you yeah, I'd
Or
rather
if you use them as like a first draft and you can edit.
yeah, like whatever.
Yeah, I like it for first drafts in a lot of
I
cases.
have a use case for it. I've been using it to help me write architectural decision records.
Mm-hmm.
I'll describe to it everything I'm thinking and how I want it to work, and then I just tell it to like spit it back out in an ADR format, and it does a pretty good job on formatting, the thought process of what I'm telling you.
Yeah, and I like Claude for that kind of situation because it can have like this markdown document repository that it's working against while you're talking to it, and then you just copy that out without having to tell it summarize this. No, actually summarize it.
So going back to the comments, it just happens that I look at a lot of companies that I haven't seen because I've been in the company like 10 months, keep finding stuff. So what I do is try to figure like what doesn't it do or what is missing or which inputs are actually manual. It's useful for that part. But I don't trust it writing code. I use it just like automating like tasks rather than writing a function and that's what's going to be
Go.
I feel like we get to write so little code that I don't want it to take away the writing code, but I hate writing documentation like comments and stuff. But like that's a use case I feel is very fit.
Exactly. That's why I found like it to be the most useful where I'm looking at something. You start filling in the blanks and then the code is like
We got one in the back corner real quick.
For companies that are having trouble adopting due to like privacy and security concerns, do you have any thoughts or advice?
We had a limited group, legal kind of create that only like few people had access to these tools, like 2 company accounts, and only then when we figure out, the usage and put them only then start spreading.
We,
Company you did like a test run with you.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah, we had like only you can only use these. If you use your personal accounts, like you have to switch over to like OpenAI until then. That's how we did it. The copyright is right here, so very
yeah, in terms of like just the security side of it, one way that we adopted it earlier in our company before a pivot that made it so we didn't have to care about that as much anymore was we had a specific repository that was like less critical security-wise, and we were okay to use it there early on. And then eventually we didn't have the code bases anymore that were security critical, so we just opened it up.
We have a working relationship with Google, and Gemini can provide a lot of those security concerns.
And then other than that, like, depending upon, how much you can trust your team there, for the coding experience, it's pretty awful to be doing the copying, pasting in and out. You just really need it integrated. Similar to like the REPL, you just need the REPL integrated. But for bouncing off architectural decisions, you can kind of clean it of sensitive material the same way you would for asking in a forum or whatever else, and still get some feedback. Well, I don't know. I don't remember when this ends. Okay.